In this video, we're going to look at how ideas from the Enlightenment were influencing France before the Revolution, so we can understand how this drove people's belief and thus drove the French Revolution as well. So, at the time, right at the end of the 18th century, before the French Revolution, Europe was going through a period that today we call the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment saw the development of new ideas, particularly ideas that had to do with political philosophy, how governments were to be run, and ideas having to do with the nature of humanity. Concepts of perhaps people have inalienable rights. Perhaps there are things that are common to human nature that should be respected. And at this period of time in the 1700s, which is the 18th century, remember, France was the cultural center of Europe. You might have heard the phrase lingua franca, and that does actually tie in to French being the courtly language, the language of the intellectuals throughout Europe in this time period. One of the other things that we need to pay attention to in this time period is the appearance of salons, which acted kind of the same way that bars and pubs would now, except that part of the idea of them was not necessarily to go drink and dance, but to go drink and eat and talk and discuss. This was a place where the high elites of society or the more well-off classes would go to talk with each other and to discuss ideas. And this is part of why the Enlightenment was taking place at this particular point in time. This cultural phenomenon of, oh, we're going to go to a place and we're going to talk to entertain ourselves. While that might sound boring, a good discussion can be really interesting sometime. And if you're all invested and all have been thinking about the same ideas, well, that can drive good discussion. So people would talk about things like liberty and happiness and religion and beauty and freedom and rights. What does that mean? Why is that important? Also important to note as well is this is when books and pamphlets were really taking off as a mass media, a way of taking an idea and spreading it to many people at once. Now people could print off books and make pamphlets and flyers and newspapers so ideas could be communicated through the written word quickly and easily. So we're just going to look at two quotes from an influential philosopher of the time. And this philosopher is Voltaire, who is one of the most famous French philosophers. In general, the art of government consists in taking as much money as possible from one class of citizens to give to another. So Voltaire is talking political philosophy here. He is criticizing the government and the heavy taxation that is basically taking everything that one group of people has and giving it to another group of people that already have a lot. Man is free at the moment he wishes to be. So the interesting thing about Voltaire, and Voltaire's thoughts were very influential throughout the French Revolution. You could do entire courses on Voltaire and how the revolution played out. Interesting thing about Voltaire is that he thought about this idea of freedom and this idea that, change might be possible, not sometime in the future, But change could happen now, in the present. And all Voltaire felt was necessary was for people to think with reason, not to be guided by passion, not to be guided by faith, but to use their intellect and their reason in order to think things through of what's going to be the best for the most people. And while I did mention not thinking with faith there, though, Voltaire as well was a huge proponent of freedom of religion and that people should be allowed to worship the way they want to. And that is another important thing to come out of the French Revolution, because at this time, freedom of religion was not a thing in Europe. We take it for granted in Canada because it is enshrined in our Constitution. But France at the time was an explicitly Catholic nation where you had to be Catholic. There was not really a choice in that for most people, and you certainly could not be part of the upper crust or indeed lead the country if you were any faith but the Catholic